Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to Introduction to Business 30, Achieving World-Class Operations. This lesson for today will look at waiting line analysis. Waiting line analysis is one of my more favorite topics in operations management. I think one of the reasons I really like teaching it is that I've seen it used a lot in healthcare situations where I've done some of my research and employment experience looking specifically at waiting line analysis. And I also find that this is a fairly straightforward topic to address in a student class, because all of us, whether you're an instructor or a student or anybody, we've had experiences where we've waited in line for different situations. So we can relate to this from personal experience, and that can be a valuable teacher in this situation. So what we're going to do in this lesson is look at some different issues with respect to waiting line analysis. Now, this topic is a fairly broad and deep topic within operations management, so we're merely going to scratch the surface here by looking at a couple of key topics. We're going to look at, number one, the prevalence of waiting lines. In other words, why they exist, why they are so numerous in our society. We're going to examine some of the trade-offs that are made when organizations are looking at providing service, and there might be a waiting line of customers that would go through the process. And we're going to finish by looking at some overall managerial issues, some key items that need to be considered when organizations are establishing a situation where there's going to be waiting lines involved. Now, we're not going to go into detail on all the mathematics and some of the computer technology that's done, because again, this is a fairly broad and deep topic within operations management. So we're going to look at some issues that I find personally entertaining from a waiting line perspective. I'm going to try as best I can throughout this material to tie this into real life experience and real life practice. So you'll often see this word used quite a bit in the real world. It's called queuing. Queuing is actually a British term. I think the word, it comes from the word queue, which is the British terminology for a waiting line. So sometimes in the literature you might see a waiting line referred to as a queuing system. And there could be a lot of different queuing situations that we can experience in life. We could have situations such as buying groceries. And if you look at the picture on the right-hand side, you see 5 people that are waiting in line purchasing groceries, and they look a lot like I tend to look when I'm waiting in line, that you're frustrated, you're nervous, you're anxious, and you're wondering, why is this waiting line not moving at all? Maybe you wait in line when you visit a doctor, that you might wait in his or her waiting room while you're waiting to be seen by the physician. There are a lot of other waiting in line experiences that we have. We go to a movie. You might wait in line to buy your ticket or to buy your popcorn. You go to a blood donor clinic. There could be a waiting line situation there. You could go to your bank. You may have to wait in line to use the ATM, or maybe wait in line to access a teller. What's really interesting to note from a waiting line perspective is this true story. Now, this is an actual incident that happened about 15 years ago in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I didn't pull this out of the National Enquirer. I didn't make this up. This is an actual story of a waiting line situation where something went terribly wrong. Now, you may want to pause the slides just to read through this in more detail, but let me give you the brief overview of what happened. In this situation, there was a customer that went through a grocery supermarket waiting line, and she actually had too many items to use the express checkout lane, but the clerk allowed her to go through the waiting line anyway. It turned out that the person who was immediately behind this customer, was so incensed and irate that the customer ahead of her was able to proceed through the express checkout with too many items, that she followed this customer into the parking lot, drew out a pocket knife, and basically sliced off part of her nose, only because this first customer had too many items to use in the checkout lane at the express counter. This is a great example of where people can seriously retaliate and have some bizarre reactions when they wait in line. I said earlier that we wouldn't be able to go through any of the mathematical aspects of waiting line analysis. It turns out that waiting line analysis also has a lot of psychology and anthropology attached to it. So this is a very vast topic within the field of business and throughout into other areas as well. You might ask yourself, Why are waiting lines so prevalent? Why do they seem to exist? Why is it that every time I want to go to Costco, I'm waiting in line behind somebody? Why is it that whenever I go through the drive-thru at McDonald's, I'm waiting behind another vehicle? Well, it turns out that there's two main reasons why waiting lines are so prevalent. They deal with what's called the arrival rate and the service time. The arrival rate is basically the rate at which customers arrive into the organization to be seen. So it's the rate at which a customer might arrive to McDonald's, the rate at which a shopper shows up to the checkout lanes at Costco, the rate at which a person comes to visit a bank, for example. Now, when I say the arrival rate is random, what I mean there is that it's coming from some probability distribution, that it's not known in advance what the actual arrivals are going to be every single minute of every single day. They're random. You get sometimes when there's a huge spike in arrivals, other times when the arrival rate is a lot lower. Again, so you don't have a constant arrival rate that you always know ahead of time. There are sometimes when it's much higher, and sometimes when it's much lower. The second thing that makes waiting lines so prevalent is what's called service time being random. And service time refers to how long it takes a cashier, a physician, somebody who's providing the service, so how long it takes them to provide the actual service. And that might be random. Some people, for example, if you were going through, pick an example like a fast food restaurant, so you're waiting in line to go to Wendy's. It might turn out that some people have very complex orders that might take a huge time to be served, and others have very quick orders, so their service time could be a lot shorter. Some people, maybe the servers themselves, the people who are actually providing the service, could have a lot of skills and be able to provide the service quite quickly, and others could be new trainees and might need a bit more time to do the common tasks. So it's due to the random nature of the arrival rate and the service time that makes waiting lines such a prevalent part of our daily lives. The vital issue in waiting line analysis is actually a key transformation process decision that's at the core of operations management. If you think back to our earlier discussion when we looked at operations management involving the transformation of inputs into outputs to produce something of value, the key transformation process here is for an organization to identify how many servers they need, how many cashiers should Walmart have, how many tellers should a bank have, how many ticket takers should a movie theater have. In other words, how much capacity does the organization need to best meet the needs of its customers? And that is the vital issue in waiting line analysis. It's a capacity decision where the organization is trying to determine how much capacity they need to provide to best meet the needs of the incoming customers. There's a crucial trade-off involved in waiting line analysis, and this is between two particular costs. An organization would look at the cost of providing the service as well as the cost of the customer wait time. Now, the cost of providing the service is fairly straightforward. It would be the salary of your staff members. So if you had 6 cashiers working in a retail establishment and they made $15 per hour, then 15 times 6 means $90. That's what you'd be paying per hour to staff your service level, to staff the number of people that you've hired to provide service to your customers. The second cost is much more challenging to identify, and that's the cost of the customer wait time. And the reason it's challenging is that different customers have different perspectives and ideas in terms of how much how much their time is worth. Some customers might be more impatient and in a hurry. Maybe they'd be putting a huge price on their wait time. Other customers might be more leisurely, and they don't mind waiting. What it boils down to is that second cost is very challenging for organizations to quantify or identify. And it's due to the fact that different customers have different perceptions and ideas in terms of their overall cost associated with their wait time. If you look at some interesting managerial issues in waiting line analysis, there are some fascinating examples of what's currently happening out there with organizations providing service to customers. I don't know how many of you have visited Disneyland or Disney World or any sort of a big theme park like that. But there are some very interesting aspects and contributions that Disney is now making to be able to improve its waiting lines. You probably know that at a theme park like Disneyland or Disney World, they're getting thousands and thousands of people coming through a handful of very popular rides. So customers obviously are going to wait. Well, what can you do to improve their experience? Maybe not so much reduce their wait time, but make them feel better about waiting. So what Disney might do is make the lines appear to be moving forward continuously. In other words, you're always going back and forth, you're snaking around an area. It gives the perception to the customer that they're moving a lot, but in reality they're not moving a whole lot of space. If you look at the picture on the right hand side, you see that it looks like there are people going in different directions, back and forth, snaking around that area. That's a good example of making the lines appear to be moving forward continuously. Number two, you might entertain people while they wait. Maybe you have a video that people can watch while they wait, so they're actually, even though they're waiting in line, there's something productive for them to do so they feel less anxious and frustrated about their waiting line experience. Third, you might say, you might post a sign as to how long somebody is going to wait. If you enter the queue or waiting line at this point, here's how long you would expect to wait. It gives people an idea so they can ballpark how much time they're going to be spending waiting in line. Another great contribution Disney made was introduced over a decade ago in 1999. It's called the Fast Pass system. What the Fast Pass system does is help a customer, basically enable that customer, give them the right to return to a certain ride at a predetermined time later in the day. What Disney will do is allocate this for very popular rides. The example on the right hand side is the ride known as Splash Mountain, which I've gone to Disney twice, and Splash Mountain is my all-time favorite ride there. So if it's a very popular ride, this actually gives a customer an advance ticket to come back at a certain time. So what Disney is doing from an operations management perspective is that they're allocating some of their future capacity to meet the needs of that specific customer. So then he or she can come back at that time later in the day and be guaranteed to access the ride anytime between, in that example, between 12:15 and 1:15 p.m. There's a great example in the operations management literature known as the unknown consultant. And in this particular situation, it's apparently a true story, although I don't have the name of the person in front of me. But in this particular case, there was a New York City high-rise in the 1950s, and the people who lived in the high-rise complained that it took so long waiting for the building's elevator to come down to the ground floor. The building had just a single elevator, and the people who lived in that high-rise said they were waiting far too long. So this consultant, this unknown consultant, comes by and proposes an idea to improve the waiting line situation. Now, you might want to pause this slide here to see if you can come up with what you would do to be able to improve this situation. How would you improve the experience of people who are waiting in line? I know when I've discussed this in my courses here at the University of Saskatchewan, some people have said, well, you could build a second elevator, which you could do, but in this case they only wanted to use one. What the consultant did is he went into the high-rise, and right near the elevator, he installed a full-length mirror. Now you might ask yourself, what does a full-length mirror have to do with an elevator? Well, what happened is that the people who were living in the high-rise, they would come and they would be waiting on the ground floor for the elevator, and then they could look in the full-length mirror. They could look at themselves. They could adjust their suit or their dress, or comb their hair, or fix their glasses. It gave them something productive to do while they were waiting in line. It turned out that after the consultant installed the full-length mirror, the complaints went way, way down, even though the wait time was the same. You see here in this case, it's almost like the Disney example, where you're giving somebody who's waiting in line an opportunity to be productively engaged while they're waiting in line, and that reduces their frustration, reduces their anxiety, and it improves the overall experience. Now, I mentioned earlier in this lesson that there's a lot of situations that are very complex to do. There's incredibly complex calculations that you might have if you're trying to solve this mathematically. You can actually use computer models like computer simulation to try to help address these issues. But again, I'm not going to go into detail on that because that's a very vast topic in and of itself. I've tried to focus more on the managerial aspects of waiting line and why it's so prevalent in today's society. So one final question for us to look at. How could an organization reduce the time that customers spend in line? So if you were, I don't know, running a grocery store or a movie theater, a fast food restaurant, what could you do to reduce the time that customers spend in line? I've got a few thoughts that I'll show you here on the next slide, but you might want to pause briefly and see if you can come up with ways that you would do and things you would adopt to reduce the time that customers might spend in line. Here's some of my thoughts. An organization could take appointments or reservations. A restaurant will do that. They'll take reservations for a certain time, so a person can come back at a predetermined time to be served at that time. A doctor's office will take appointments. And number two, you might have customers do part of the service themselves. You might see this when you visit a fast food restaurant, like a McDonald's. They'll give you the, they'll take your order, they'll prepare the food for you, but they'll give you the drink cup, and you can fill that yourself. So what you're doing there is they're allowing the customers to do part of the service rather than tying up a worker to fill up your cup. You can do it yourself. A third thing you might do is to offer price reductions at what are called off-peak times. For example, if there was a slow time during the day, maybe an organization like a restaurant reduces its price. What that might do is what's called smoothing the demand. So if you have a really attractive lower price, maybe in the middle of the afternoon, maybe somebody will choose to go out to the restaurant during the middle of the day. You actually see this at movie theaters where sometimes on a certain night of the week, like Tuesday, they might have a lower price, or during the matinees they'll have lower prices. What they're trying to do in that case is to smooth the demand to reduce the waiting lines and the wait times for the peak periods that would occur during the day. Anyway, that's lesson 6, looking at waiting line analysis. Thank you for listening, and we will see you in lesson 7.